Hello, this is Leftly in UK. I am Avery, and today we're going to talk about transgender rights. Now, this can be quite a controversial topic. Very few people like to talk about this because it's very debated within the left community, the right community. It doesn't matter where you are in politics. This is a hugely debated issue. Now, myself, I am a transgender female, and so this issue means a lot to me, and therefore everything I say you should take with a pinch of salt because it's very possible that bits and pieces of what I'm saying may just come from personal passion and experience rather than an informed point of view. So, if you aren't aware already, the Scottish Government passed the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, which meant that transgender people within Scotland could identify however they wished, and they could choose how they identified when it came to their gender. Previous to this, they had to apply for a gender recognition certificate, which required a doctor's notice, and it required a certain amount of time in therapy and such. It's a system we currently have in the rest of the UK, in England and such. And for example, myself, I will need to go through the Gender Identity Development Service, which is a 3-year waiting list. I need to get certain notes from certain therapists, and then I need to go and see these people who decide if I'm trans enough, which is really patronising and is not a very good way round the system, and that's the current system we've got. In addition, if a trans person is married, they cannot get a gender recognition certificate without the recognition of their partner. If their partner does not agree to that, they cannot get their gender legally changed. That's insane. That means that legally you are seen as the property of your partner, and your partner gets the final say on your own personal identity simply because you're trans. It makes zero sense. It makes very little sense. So the Scottish Government passed this law with an overwhelming majority, and it was incredibly hopeful for the trans community, as it looked like the UK was going in the right direction. Scotland finally passed a law that was good for the trans community, and there were arguments that this would inhibit the rights of women. However, the Gender Recognition Reform Bill only changes how you identify. It doesn't change where you can go. It doesn't change what you can do. For example, me as a trans woman in the UK, I can just go into a woman's bathroom already because that's how I identify, and that's how the Equality Act works. It's the Equalities Act that defines where a transgender person can go. And so, this does not conflict with women's rights. However, the Conservative government decided it was time to suppress the rights of transgender people up and down the country by appealing this act, and doing so, putting Scotland back to the original Gender Recognition Act laws, which require that really lengthy, really tiring process. So, they put that through Parliament, and many Labour ministers who were supposed to be on the side of the working class, they were supposed to be socialists, they're supposed to stand up for minorities, many of these people abstained. That's madness. The Labour Party abstained, mostly. There were some MPs that stood against this act, this idea of appealing the Scottish Government's democratic decision, but most of them abstained. As a result, the Conservatives won a majority, and immediately this was appealed. This was a huge loss for the trans community. We thought we'd gained something, and it was taken away from us. It was ripped away from us really harshly and really cruelly by a government that doesn't really want us around. As socialists, we should make sure we stand by every single person, every minority. We should represent everyone equally and ensure that the rights of people are always protected and preserved. This was not the case with the Labour Party, with the Conservative Party, with the Green Party, with the Liberal Democrats. It was only really the SNP that seemed to care, which makes sense because the SNP want Scotland to be independent. They want Scotland to be autonomous. Yet the rest of Parliament saw the suppression of Scotland as a lot more important than the rights of their fellow men and women, which was upsetting. It's truly, truly upsetting because people in the transgender community are being discriminated against and wrongfully done, and they're being used as a political football for the simple sake of political gain and for the simple sake of suppressing the Scottish Parliament. That's what this is all about. We don't want Scotland to break free, in the eyes of the Conservative Party at least, and so we will block their laws, and we don't care who it hurts in the process. This is not a view we should enforce. This is something we should be protesting against. This is something we should be acting against. But it's not. I personally, Avery, the host of this show, I have resigned from my positions in the Labour Party and I have cancelled my subscription to the Labour Party because I cannot ethically be a part of a party that doesn't represent me, that prioritises the suppression of a democratic government more than the rights of their own citizens. The rights of what's predicted to be about 0.5% of their own citizens. That's not a small amount of people. That is not a small amount of people. That could be up to 4 million people in this country could be gender diverse. That is an incredible statistic. And yet we're ready to throw those people under the bus because Scotland wants to break free. They want to pull a Freddie Mercury and break free. I don't blame them. If our government is that ready to suppress a minority in order to gain what is basically just an oil field in the on the northwest coast of Scotland, because that's what we're really talking about at the moment, then I don't blame Scotland for wanting to break free. And it's saddening. It's really, really saddening. There was a protest at Downing Street by trans protesters, and it meant nothing. What came out in the media afterwards was the Conservative government finally saying that they may ban transgender conversion therapy, a practice that Stonewall found could include prayer and corrective rape, among many other things. The idea alone that you could rape someone until they're correct is horrendous. It's a terrible, terrible idea. And it's cruel, and as a civilized society, this should not be a practice that is illegal. I assume that the rape itself would be illegal, but the fact that it's used in a corrective way is not. And this is something that transgender people can be put up against. The gay community recently, in the last few years, had it announced that their conversion therapy was going to be banned. But Boris Johnson had stated that transgender conversion therapy needed further consideration. And I personally even went out to protest this. This was horrendous news for the transgender community. And now the government's saying that they'll finally ban it. But are these just words to appease a community that's already disgruntled at their decisions? Because there's no real sign of action. There's no sign that the government's actually going to do anything to stop this, to ban conversion therapy. So what is actually going to happen to transgender people in this country? Are we going to be further suppressed? Because I know the transgender men and women of Scotland are going to be. And there's the argument that yes, people in Scotland didn't vote for transgender people to have the self-ID law in place and for the rights of women to be affected. However, this was part of the SNP's manifesto. If you aren't aware that this is a part of your party's manifesto, you shouldn't vote for that party. You should be aware of what your party stands for before voting for it. And that's a really, really important note. And people online, they will claim things and they will make many, many ludicrous suggestions that transgender people are predators or that they're going to impact women's rights, but statistically, and I've done the mathematics here, statistically, transgender people are less likely to commit sexual offences than your average cisgender person. And this could be down to the fact that a lot of trans people face sexual trauma themselves. This could be down to the fact that a lot of trans people are discriminated against, and so they're very passive. Whatever it's down to, it's an important thing to note. And so we mustn't forget our siblings, our transgender males, females, and people who are non-binary who still use the transgender label. We mustn't forget these people. These are still people in our society, and they mean no harm to me or to you. If you see a protest, go and support them. If you see some strike action and you're a transgender person, go out, wrap yourself in a transgender flag and make yourself seen. If you're a transgender person in an area that isn't usually very accepting of that, protest. Make yourself seen. We need action in this country. We're at a point now where our silence in person and our words over the internet aren't enough. We need to take to the streets and we need to protest. I'm not saying we start hurting people and breaking the law. I'm just saying we need to exercise our basic human rights for our basic human rights. Because transgender rights are human rights. And we need to ensure that no matter what. So, thank you for listening to this episode of Left Lean UK. I plan to make more in future, and I apologise for not producing these very frequently. But I am Avery, this is Left Lean UK, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye bye.